Hello, Krisalava Tosway in Anishinaabe, Anda Kami Kanin Dunjaba, Makwanin Dudem, Anishinaabe Kwayandao. So thank you for joining us tonight. We have an exciting agenda for you. Before we officially begin with opening remarks, I would like to recognize the traditional territory of where I am situated, which is the Big Smoke of Toronto. So I'd like to recognize the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Uh, with that, I would like to also welcome our team here. And just a little bit about IPAC before we begin. I know some of the youth may have, went on our website, and the team here, I think, knows about IPAC. But for me, really, what resonated was being a rural Indigenous youth and coming to the big city of Toronto. I was really looking for that sense of community in any way, shape, or form it took. And IPAC was founded 10 years ago on that premise, really, and what it stands for. And if I think about it in three pillars, everything we do for our membership has to follow our three founding pillars, which is network growth, so helping Indigenous people build their network; professional development, and that can take many forms, whether that's, we've done a lot of work in the past having elders or knowledge keepers come in and talk about not losing your authentic self or your identity to the organization you may work for, or personal branding and what forms that can take. And I think the last and important piece is the recognizing excellence of Indigenous professionals from coast to coast. And why that's so important is for, I think, Indigenous youth really need to see themselves reflected in where they work, and not just at entry level roles, but in leadership positions, in positions of power where they can make good decision making, and really have their voices heard in an authentic way, but also not necessarily can be scared being the minority um, as a group. So just kind of really identifying that and working through through IPAC in that way, I think, is what truly stands out for me. So without further ado, I think I'll pass it to, I'm just trying to see if he's online, William, to introduce
Yes.
himself, and then we'll introduce the panelists.
I'm William. I'm the Pathways to Success coordinator for Toronto. And we have Alexandra and Nina, who are ambassadors. I also want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat in Treaty 13 territory. Yeah, so this is a process for me. I want to acknowledge also I'm Métis from the Métis Nation of Ontario, and I just want to acknowledge my grandmother, who is from Treaty 1 territory out St. Boniface, and she just has been such an inspiration for me, and has in so many of her teachings has guided me to speak, and that's what I'm doing right now. So I think that's a big part of all this. I would not be here today without those teachings. So Pathways to Success is our internship program. I notice what's overwhelming, or very overwhelming for me, is just the amount of support that we have here from so many different organizations, and I wanted to just speak to that. I know we do have some youth here, but I think it really shows me just how much support that we have for our youth here, and how many people want to be on board with these kind of initiatives. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here. Miigwech, Marcy. Yeah, I think it's just such a heartwarming to see how many people want our Indigenous youth to succeed. So yeah, so and in the process, trying to connect youth with internships, and also make sure that there's a smooth transition in order for them to get into these positions, and to mitigate any sort of gap that may exist, and to sort of continue this cycle you know, for generations to come. So this is great, great, rewarding work, and I'm happy to be here. And then so we have our three presenters. We have Nicole McCormick, who's the founding member and co-chair of the Rogers Indigenous Peoples Diversity Network. Scott Caven, which is he's the relationship lead with Watershed Partners, and James Mckay, which is the diversity, inclusion, and equity lead at talent acquisition for BMO. So, welcome everybody, and without further ado, we could say let's do this. So I'll leave it. Maybe we could start with Nicole McCormick if you want to begin our presentation here and give us a bit more knowledge. Thank you.
Hoping everybody can hear me. I always have trouble with the mute button. Sego Sewa Gwego, Nicole Yanyats, Anowala, Nawiki Tuloda, Kenyage Haga, Niwakinan Sotan, Oswega Nituageno. My name is Nicole. I am and identify as Mohawk from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory in Oswego here in Ontario, just outside the Hamilton area, which is where I live and I work normally pre-COVID in Toronto at City News Toronto. So a little bit about myself. Like I said, I do identify as Indigenous. You know, growing up, I've struggled with a lot of the struggles that Indigenous people go through, and obviously very proud to say that I've survived many of the systems that have been laid out for us. You know, I've survived the foster care system, my own intergenerational trauma, you know, my parents' intergenerational trauma. Both my parents were addicts. So I've kind of grown up in a world where I always had to try to take care of myself and build my own career and my own successes. And, you know, with a lot of help along the way. I've survived, you know, domestic, you know, abuse and different abuses growing up. And I think that all is, you know, coping mechanisms, obviously, from dealing with that trauma that you deal with growing up, right? But the day that changed my life was the day that I got accepted to Mohawk College for journalism. I always knew that it was my goal in life to be a storyteller. It's a natural thing for us as Indigenous people to be storytellers. And I always wanted to give a voice to people who didn't have those voices. Growing up, I didn't have a voice because I was just a kid. And there were a lot of, you know, every time I turned on the TV and looked in the media, there was always, you know, other people. I never saw my face, right? And if I did see my face, it was in a negative light. We were usually being portrayed as criminals or, you know, at the forefront of, you know, a struggle that was being told the wrong way. And I always wanted to change the narrative. I've always wanted to do that. So when I got accepted to college, it was just a game changer for me because it showed me that I was really good at something and other people had that confidence in me that I was good at something, which was the first time that I'd ever felt that in my entire life. Fast forward all of those years, 20 years now, I'm very proud to say that I've built a very successful career in journalism. It has not been easy, and you know, we can discuss that probably a little bit later. It hasn't been easy. I work in a very underrepresented community. There is no Indigenous people where I work in my newsroom, and there hasn't been for 20 years. So it's always something that I've tried to encourage more young people to find their voice and to join me in a career that's all about changing the narrative for us and for setting us up for success. The other part of the job that was mentioned earlier, So I'm now the chair of the Rogers Indigenous Peoples Network, which again has taken me some time to be elevated to that role because, you know, like most businesses, they're a little behind in how they approach certain things. And I've worked hard for this position, and the whole goal of this is to change the narrative within the corporate structure, help people understand, you know, where we've been, where we are, where we're going, and how they can help do that. So again, this is something I'm really proud of. I used to say I was lucky, but this has nothing to do with luck. This has been hard work. This has been resilience. This has been overcoming disappointment on so many occasions. And this is all me. And I want every student and kid to know, listening to me and listening to our other panelists, that you're not alone. There's people just like you, and we want and will help you succeed with whatever you want to do in this life.
Thanks, Nicole. That was pretty powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I also too, I'm currently located in Ottawa on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. I'm Ganyagahaga from the Six Nations of the Grand River. So again, a community colleague of Nicole. I grew up outside of Six Nations on Brantford, in the city of Brantford, and spent a bunch of my time playing lacrosse and with my grandparents, leading through high school. I guess, you know, talking about like a little bit about my education or kind of going forward on this, I'll start with, I went into university under the guise of thinking I wanted to get into politics. I was going into public administration. That was what I was accepted into at Carleton University. And through that, I found that some of the classes were too early in the morning on Fridays. So I had to switch I literally had to switch my major out to like law and to like further on to sociology, going through my career there. But nothing was actually resonating with me while I was at university. I loved the courses. I liked where it was going. It wasn't until one of my good friends who was going to school with me gave me a brochure, and it was for a public relations course at Algonquin College. And it was a 2-year intensive. It had been shortened from 3. And he decided, he goes like, this is you. Like, this is all about pure communications. It's a melding of advertising, journalism, marketing. He's like, this is all, like he goes, this is what you're all about. So I actually took that to the heart. And, you know, post university, I went and got my public relations diploma at Algonquin College and went into communications. And it was a right fit. I didn't know it. It got there. Somebody pointed out perhaps strengths and interests. So that's where I ended up. And I was happy in coming out with communications, leading into, and I didn't know where this was going to take me, because I mean, there's so many things you can do with communications education. And my first job was as a summer student with the Chiefs of Ontario, the regional organization here, the advocacy organization for the 133 First Nations communities in Ontario. Which then led me into, I found that I wanted to work in arts, music. And I started in with like the Aboriginal Music Project, trying to help that kind of continue and grow, which invariably led me to a contract gig with Aboriginal Voices magazine. It was being run by Gary Farmer at the time. I'm probably really showing my age, and I know you guys are so young, you don't probably even remember that this is actually in existence. And this is like back in the, you know, the 90s, like late 90s. So maybe not the early 90s. And through that, I was actually hired to be the coordinator. Basically, I was a coordinator and publicist for the premiere of Smoke Signals, the movie, when it premiered here in Toronto. It was probably, that was a highlight. Like then I knew, okay, I'm in the right path. Like this is where I want to be. I want to stay in film and I want to stay in music. And kind of getting through that, I was hired on, and I ended up with the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation as a production assistant on the Achievement Awards television show in Regina. So it felt good that I'd fallen into something, and it was right place, right time. And a lot of diligence and continuing networking, kind of going through that. In a very young stage of your career, you're not going to, like, there's not a lot of money, you know, nobody's really was there to kind of give you a hand up, but everybody that was around you was very supportive, especially within the Indigenous art community. But I hit a turning point, and I had a death in my family, and I went home to Six Nations and to Brantford, and I had an opportunity to either continue my education and come back to Toronto and do another year in digital television production, like visual arts, and go into TV and production, or stay with my career path so I could be near my family. And I chose my community. I became the public affairs officer for the Six Nations elected council. And that was a turning point because, well, not choosing where I wanted to be, choosing to be at home, it gave me a gift of having a strong person who mentored me, and that was Berta Jameson. She was currently the chief of the Six Nations, the elected council, who was also the first female ombudsperson in Ontario for 10 years. She was the first Indigenous female to receive her law degree in Canada. So she had a lot to offer. And, you know, for the next 6 years that I worked under her, I learned a lot. Invariably, though, it was kind of funny, kind of going through this whole arts and entertainment. I went back to my community, which was very political, for 3 years at Six Nations. I ended up working with her at the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation, where she headed up after 2005. But politics always called me, and my career path then jolted again, and I decided I wanted to get into politics. So in 2007, the province of Ontario, having just received the report on the Ipperwash inquiry, created the very first standalone Ministry of Indigenous or Aboriginal Affairs at the time. And I was hired into the minister's office in the fall of 2007. And for the next 2.5 years, I worked in that office underneath 3 different ministers of Aboriginal Affairs, because they like to switch them out a lot, apparently. And I was underneath McGinty. I took a 2-year hiatus because I understood that I wanted to keep, and I guess maybe part of, I'll get back to this, and then I took 2 years off, and I went and I worked as the Director of Aboriginal Affairs for the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, to try and have an insider's voice, if you will, on Indigenous affairs and how to do engagement and how to do it better and be a better junior or exploration company in Canada. And then I got called back by the government. Kathleen Wynne had just become the new premier, and I received some pressure to actually come back and provide some advisory services back inside the government. So I went back. So politics, and now, well, sorry, then I ended up at Chiefs of Ontario, Director of Communications, Federal Affairs for 3 years. And now I'm here at Watershed Partners, which is a strategic advisory firm and co-design. That's, sorry, really long way to say, like, there's a career path, but all that's coming back around to say that you're going to find a common theme through some of your things you do. And mine's always been politics and Indigenous people. I've always wanted to give back to the people. So no matter what I've entered into, it's always about giving back. And I'm happy where things have led me. And I think that there's a lot that you can do. Don't be afraid to take challenges and take new turns. That's the big thing. But as long as you know where your core is, you're going to be successful and you're going to be able to select good things. Sorry for taking all that time. I feel like I've just took everybody's time. Sorry, James. You know, you can make yours short.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. And that's a great story. Hello, everyone. My name is James Mckay. I am Ojibwe. I'm from Batchewana First Nation. I'm 8 hours away from my community, but happy that I made the move. I've worked for all 3 levels of the Canadian government, municipal, provincial, and federal in various capacities. I've worked for the largest companies in the IT space, and I've worked in a few banks here in Canada. And you would think that with all that experience, I would have a plan. And when I was asked to talk to this group, I tried to put myself back into the head of James Mckay when I packed up my blazer and drove out of town, not knowing what I was going to do the next week. But that's what happened. I had no plan. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And nobody was really stepping up to pay me to play baseball for the rest of my life. So I certainly had to figure something out. But what grounded me was that I had to stay realistic. I had to think realistically of what I wanted to do. And more than anything else, that kind of what guided me in my personal journey. So what else would guide me? Well, my elder always told me, no, James, keep your head up and finish what you start, because that's when it only counts. So while I had no real detailed plan, I knew I needed to have good habits to keep it simple and, to be able to understand what I could control. Hold your head up, finish what you started. Pretty simple. And for me, taking something so scary and daunting, like picking a school, a program, if any, how would I pay for it? And then to finding a job and then a career. So what comforted me? Well, I was okay though with the fact that I didn't have everything planned out for me like some of my friends did, who may have had two parents to help guide them. Maybe both went to university with big careers. That wasn't my experience. My brother and I, a year and a half apart, raised by a single mom on a waitress salary was my reality. So thinking realistically, again, was where I ended up lying. And I was okay with that. So what I did understand and what guided me was that, again, while I didn't have a plan, I had good habits. And that meant that I couldn't just sit at home and do nothing. I actually had to get up and work for it. So what did I know? Well, I knew that I had to find employment to pay my way in the world. I knew that I needed to keep that job and build on any experiences I had, and that keeping a job is giving me the experience to find the next one. I knew that if I lost the job, which happens, it's a natural course of life, and that I had to do my best to find another one quickly, because I realized that you don't really get hired when you're unemployed. You only seem to get hired when you're working. It's just a natural evolution of things, but it does show, right, that you are learning, and volunteerism counts. So even if you're not working, like I mentioned, always be looking, to be doing something. You don't always have to know everything, and you don't need to forecast what's going to happen in the future. The journey you're on and the actions you take are more important than the destination. I know it sounds corny, but it rings true. It's a very simple idea, continuing to ensure that I was working, that I was going to build on the path that I was on, and I was going to continue moving forward. Meeting new people in the roles I had, new companies, is what opened doors for me to walk through and allows me to enjoy the career I have today. This may not work for everyone, right? Many people do need a defined path laid out for them. But again, if that's not your reality, you need to look at what is going to make you successful and what grounds you and helps you move forward in what can be a very challenging, unfair world. You heard from other speakers that our community always has to do things better and faster, and it's true. We do. And for the foreseeable future, it will always be like that until equity is a true statement in our world. For my personal journey, I found that this was the way for me to make better decisions. I knew what was going on around me right away. I wasn't trying to predict the future, so I was able to make decisions with the information I had in hand today. So it simplified it for me. Again, I wasn't trying to predict the future, and I knew that I was on the right path. Again, it's not for everyone. So if anything that I said resonates with this group, then I've done my job. Hold your head up and finish what you started. My name is James Mckay, and that has been my journey.
Powerful, powerful, James. Love that. So wanting to now think, I have a couple questions that I want our panelists to answer. And the first one really being around applying to jobs. And, for when you're just starting off, that seems to be a very onerous process. You can apply to 100 jobs and not hear back from anyone, and that can be very frustrating. So just wanting to know a little bit about your journey as you've obviously kind of passed that youth phase and applying to jobs, and just wanting to know, for a Pathways to Success participants, what should they keep in mind when they're applying to jobs?
So, when I have done a lot of interviewing in the past, and one of the things that keeps coming up is you know, they do lose a little bit of momentum. They feel bad. They feel like, you know, their resumes and their applications are going into oblivion. And it's easy to get down on yourself. But one of the worst things you could do is allow that to show in an interview. Because what this tells you is that the person interviewing you will see that, you know, yes, it's tough. But you want to always put your best foot forward, and they want to see that you can deal with a little bit of challenges. So, you know, I get that it's really tough. You're applying to many, many jobs. Some you don't even hear back from. But try not to let this affect your presence in an interview. Try not let it get you down. Speak to others that have been successful, because that, just hearing that it's actually possible and hearing a success story will uplift you and give you some strength that what you're doing will eventually land you a job or an interview. But for me, that's one thing I found was, you know, trying to stay positive is a simple thing to do.
You know, the first thing I would say is be yourself and don't change yourself for any corporate environment. And I've had to learn this along the way. You know, this goes before, you know, as you're getting ready to apply for those roles. You know, you got to remember that a lot of companies right now, especially with the push to hire diverse and to hire Indigenous, to hire BIPOC, they're not necessarily looking for the person who can do the best job as per every point of the job description. They're looking for somebody who's going to fit with their culture. They're looking for somebody who can be comfortable voicing their own opinions and their thoughts and bringing that authenticity of yourself to, you know, to the role. So to that point, find a way that really, find a way to showcase who you are and your own experiences. Don't necessarily play to every single line of that job description. You know, you don't necessarily have to, you know, be the boss of a whole bunch of people to get a job that's a management role. You could have lived experience that would align with that, you know, type of position that they're looking for. If they're looking for, you know, a managerial role. Always think about what would make you stand out above the rest. And that's who you are. What are your strengths? I don't believe people have weaknesses. I believe people have things that they can improve on. So always remember, if there's something in those lines that you're like, oh, I can't do that. Well, turn it around and make it a positive somehow, or learn how to do whatever that is so that, you know, you can say you do have some experience on that level. The biggest thing for me too, when people apply, is know who you're applying to. And this is really important. Know the company that you're applying to, right? Because you want to be happy in that company. You want to be professionally fulfilled. You want to be personally fulfilled. Again, working in the culture of that environment. So it's really important to research both aspects of a corporate environment so that you know going in that you will be happy in that role. The last thing I'll mention is, you know, attend these events, okay? I know sometimes they seem, you know, of course, I know that we're all very charismatic in this panel, but some of these, you know, groups seem a little bit, you know, sometimes it's 5 o'clock at night, you're like, you got a million other things you'd rather be doing, but it's us that can help you develop or, you know, or help you get to a point in like a job application. If you need help with your resume, if you need help preparing for an interview, if you need guidance along that way, you know, we're here to help. I know I'm here to help. I will help you along the way. And yeah, there's hands being raised, right? So attend these events, get engaged in these events. And when it comes to and don't be afraid to use us, because we're all here, like I said, and that's not just an offer, that's like a reality. I'll answer your email or your LinkedIn post within a few minutes. And then when you get to the actual interview, the most important part is to be yourself. And you will hear me say this multiple times throughout this conversation. be yourself, because interviewers can tell if you're trying too hard. We really can. Like, a lot of my questions are not based on necessarily the job. It's how you as a person, your passion and your enthusiasm for the role and for the company is what's going to make me say, you know what, that person would be a perfect fit here. I can teach a lot of skills. I can teach you a lot, but I can't teach you passion, enthusiasm, and authenticity. And that's what, you know, I value most as a hiring manager. And just keep that in mind as you go through this process.
Great. Well, those are really hard to follow. Actually, it does. I do want to actually build off a little bit, a couple of things that Nicole and some things that have been raised. And you'd said it, you mentioned it in both times. It's like, I want to say, like, understand why are you applying for the job? Because, you know, like, sometimes it's a job because you need resources, you need to put, you know, you need a job. There's other times because you want that job. Like, this is a career path. This is the next step to where I want to go. And use that to where you want to take it. So, and I guess reflect on that. It's like, know what you want out of it. And then use that energy to put that into your application about what's happening. And by that, I mean, do the research. Talk to people who've already been in the industry, in the company, what have you. They're going to give you the insights. The most difficult thing I ever did was go through an Ontario government application process for a job, because your resume and cover letter have to have trigger words in it. Trust me, these people don't read anything. It's all scanned by a computer and there's words that are recognized. Then once you have the requisite number of things that are recognized, you will then get an offer to sit on a panel where they will then take notes about how many times you said the nice words again. It's boring, but that's how you get in. Through that kind of a process, or word of mouth, what have you. So it's recognizing why you're applying for it and how much effort you want to put into this and where you want to take it. And sometimes it's about applying for things that don't make you comfortable, but you know it's going to take you someplace else. Like, you know, you might have to reconcile it's going to be a short-term position because it's going to give you the experience to go someplace else, and be willing to do that because you're playing the long game. And don't forget that, like, this is about where you want to end up or where you want to play. So sometimes it's jumping around a little bit. And I think it's really important when thinking about that is to be yourself and about that cultural awareness, and don't give that up. Speaking from experience, sometimes I've set mine aside, and it's never, you know, having gone through a lot of that growing up, don't forget who you are and where you come from. Something I'm trying to instill in my kids as they move forward. So I'd say that, and just, you know what? Yeah, it's the research, and just put your best foot forward and be genuine, just as Nicole and everybody's been mentioning. That's the first thing that I notice, and that everybody notices when I get in front of somebody. So I can say that.
Thank you so much. I think all of that was, you know, very relevant, and I completely agree with all of your sentiments. I kind of want to, you know, think about prior to this idea around planning, because we all talked about it, and things, you know, the journey to get to where we are it's not linear, and sometimes it does change based on, you know, what you think you like or what you don't like. And Scott, you mentioned some of that in your storytelling. So I just want to talk a little bit more about, how did you figure out your education and your career goals, and like, what did that look like for you?
My career path, my education goals were actually based on the fact that I had indicated in high school that I wanted to be to my family, I wanted to be the first Mohawk prime minister, because, like, that's not even a joke. Like, I have a book saying to the next prime minister. So I was actually choosing my path because I thought, what I want to do is I'm going to go into public affairs. I'm going to take public administration. I'm going to get my law degree. I'm going to be a constitutional lawyer, and I will set myself up for a fantastic career to become the next prime minister. And all that blew apart, after I learned that my macroeconomics class was at Friday at 8 a.m. It was gone. So really, my education goals and what I chose was based off of what I thought. And I think people need to be ready to go back to school. And I'm even going to say go to school later if you're unsure. And I've said that to my kids. I'm like, if you don't know for certain, then why don't you take a year and figure it out? Like, because I fell into where I needed to be because somebody pointed it out about my love and my passion without me recognizing it. So that's how I slipped into where I went with communications. I mean, I always wanted to be in arts and entertainment after that, and television. But it wasn't until like one of my good friends actually pointed out that, hey, I think you're missing a career path here. You're chasing criminal law, you're chasing psychology and economics. So I luckily was guided back to communications, which is a fantastic career path. And I will note that not a lot of First Nations, Métis or Inuit actually pursue, and it's a really great career. And not having those voices in those communication spaces doesn't allow for that cultural awareness, for those that filter to be put on things, and to kind of diversify the people in those companies. I highly suggest it. I mean, just like journalism. I mean, trying to find, First Nations and Métis and Inuit journalists. Man, growing up, we used to be able to count 5 communications people on one hand who were operating nationally. That was like me, Don Kelly, like there was Karen. Like this is back in like, mid 90s kind of stuff with AFN. So, journalists the same way. Like you guys are the burgeoning class that are coming, underneath, and I support all of you. And seriously, like applaud where you're taking the time to sit here and listen to me just like rah. So yeah, like you don't always have to pick the path right from the get-go. Be willing to change, be uncomfortable, right? Like that's all I'll say is like sometimes halfway through you're gonna want to tack a different way. I just did. My career path into Watershed, this is a brand new, I'm working for a for-profit consultancy in strategic advisory services and co-design. How does that blend with the fact that I come from a pure communications and policy background, right? So just be willing to take a chance, be uncomfortable.
I'll feed off Scott really quick, just because he brought up the journalism, career choice. For me, it's interesting, Scott, you and I kind of started off the same way in the respect that my family wanted me to be a criminal lawyer, right? They wanted me to, make the money back then, right? It was all about, the lucrative career. And all I wanted to do in high school was run my own, run the St. Thomas More, because that's the school I went to, radio station, right? I wanted to just run a radio station. I wanted to be a radio personality. And, this was this was frowned upon by my grandpa, multi-generational lawyer. And, and then somehow through my co-op, I still managed to, go away from the law thing. And I was all set to go for a radio gig. And I got told the worst news ever was that they messed up and they put me at a television station. And at the time I thought it was like, the worst thing ever, because the last thing I ever wanted to do ever in my life was have this on a television screen. Totally confident in my ability to, do certain things, but this type of thing and being on TV really made me nervous. Well, the doors were open to everything that I could do behind the screens, right? There was so much. I ended up at a cable station, and it was just, again, one of the greatest experiences of my life. It was the best mistake that, my high school guidance counselor ever made, right? Because I didn't know television was what I wanted to do. I wanted to do radio. But those doors being opened by, my guidance counselor and by, mentors at the cable station which, you know, led to being accepted to college. I had a professor in college who actually did a lot of work with Six Nations, and he wasn't Indigenous, but that man was always about getting to know his students. And one day he comes up to me, I just remember second year, and he's like, "What's your story?" I'm like, what do you mean, what's my story? You've known me for a year, you know, I'm your kid, I'm your student. And he's like, "No, what's your story?" And he knew, I guess, you know, by, you know, things I had said, or, you know, maybe even by my appearance, that I was Indigenous. And, you know, the lesson here with, you know, this conversation with my prof is always, always, always take advantage of questions asked like that, because there's always a reason why people ask you the questions they do. I've learned that a lot in my career, but especially with college, because he set me up to apply for an Indigenous internship program back then. It was called the Global Television Aboriginal People's Internship Award back then. And shockingly, I won. It was a huge shock to me because it, you know, it was a very competitive thing, but I had a lot of support from him, which set my career up, right? It got me into a TV station in Hamilton at that point. And, you know, my career just kind of was just this beautiful succession of jobs that, you know, that I worked for, but kind of fell into my lap because I took every opportunity, right? I didn't let one opportunity pass me up. I even went to the States and worked in California for 3 years, making like less than 10 grand a year for an opportunity because it was presented to me to work in an American market and learn, you know, that journalism from a different perspective, which helped me, you know, when I came back to Canada and realized how good it is here in our country compared to the States in the way of journalism, right? And, you know, throughout this time, and this is, you know, kind of ending what I'm, you know, trying to get across, is that all this time that I've been in journalism, I've always been the only Indigenous person, okay? And you will encounter that struggle as you enter corporate environments. We are doing much better. I know, I'm sure the panelists, I'm sure Crystal can attest that a lot of corporate environments are doing better, right? We are moving in the right direction when it comes to hiring Indigenous people specifically, but you will encounter that you might feel, you know, isolated or alone in certain environments, especially journalism, if you're the only person in the room who is Indigenous. But take it from me, you need to have that voice, okay? You need to find that bravery in yourself, that strength in yourself to make sure that our voices are heard strong in environments where we're not represented, because that's the only way our voices are going to be heard. And it's been a struggle. I've wanted to leave my chosen career several times because I feel, you know, I have felt like my voice hasn't heard, or I've been questioned. My objectivity has been questioned on Indigenous stories. You know, it's been a true struggle, but with mentors along the way, with the reminder from my incredible journalism community. If you ever go on it, you know, on Native Twitter, we call it, the Indigenous journalists are so strong and so powerful right now. You're not alone. They're everywhere, right? And we've created this beautiful little social circle for us as well, for that support. So if you're ever feeling alone as you go through your career journey, go to social, because you'll always find people that sound and look just like you and talking the same language. Well, not the same language, because we have different languages, but talking the same type of language as you move through your career. So I dropped a lot on you there, lots of little lessons, but, you know, again, it's keep talking.
I can tell you about my scholastic decisions, and they weren't that sophisticated. I wasn't going to be going away to university. It wasn't in my cards. But I did go to school. I took the course that was going to be allowed me to be outside. It was environmental engineering and water resources planning was the program I took. So I was in the bush a lot. I was doing a lot of chem labs, a lot of math. But one of the reasons why I took that program was not because it was just outside, but it came with a pretty cool co-op program, which means that I got to get paid to go to school. I got a real job. And the jobs that I got, I'm looking at the board, I'm like, dang, this pays like $25 an hour. And this was just, I'm a student. And back then that was an incredible amount of money. And so my first year, I didn't graduate, but I worked hard and I stayed in that program just so I can get to the co-op. Got to the co-op, and that was one of the best experiences for me. I got to work in a chemistry lab, and I learned a ton. Go to year 2, same thing, another co-op. I got sent to Ottawa, another chem lab. Year 3, again, another co-op. It was in my hometown this time. And then I got to graduate, but I decided not to. I decided to stay, take another sister program in the school I was. Why? Well, I wanted to take another co-op program. Why? I wanted to get another job. When I graduated, I ended up leaving that program with over 2 years of sustained work experience, because one of the co-ops I took, I stayed in the whole time. I actually didn't leave. I was running a pilot water treatment plant in Sault Ste. Marie that I did outside my work hours at school. So I really looked at school as a byproduct to get to my career, and I was doing it at the same time. I really thought school was like a secondary thing. And for me, the work experience and the money I was getting was really what kept me in school. And then I ended up graduating. And then you pick up my story. As I told you, I packed up my truck and left. I packed up my truck and left, and I left the environmental engineering field for the rest of my life. I never went back. I ended up working for a casino in Aurelia. The math was the same. So a lot of math, a lot of chemistry, a lot of calculus in the program I took. So when I went to work in a casino and I was doing a lot of programming for them too, the math is the same. A lot of the skills I had inherited in my education allowed me to now have transferable skills to work in a casino. So what you decide to take at school now, I'm gonna guess you got a 50% chance you're probably not gonna work in that field ever again, or you may leave at some point. So I wouldn't get too attached to it. And so, you know, like what I learned was you don't have to have a plan, but if you're grounded and you have good habits, that can be enough. Try not to, you know, boil the ocean. Life can be as complicated as you make it. And for me, centering myself on what was important, it was, you know, for me, it was money at the time, and that grounded me, and it was simple. And so I would try to not take yourself too seriously when you're looking at what you're going to take in school, the programs you're going to have, because there's a pretty good chance that you won't be in that when you graduate, or, you know, a year or two down the line.
Love that. Love that. And yeah, I think like for most people on the call, to some degree, it's like we didn't think we were going to be where we are. So there's still so much curiosity and the unknown, and not to be scared of it, for sure. Now, thinking back into the present, you know, what has your experience been as an Indigenous leader within your workplace? I think that's a really kind of important question to tell the youth.
This question in particular was one that I was I've been stewing over, Crystal, because, you know, as a journalist and as a manager, you know, in the newsroom, like I mentioned, it's been challenging over the years to rise when it comes to questions about my objectivity when I suggest Indigenous stories. Or the question is, why should I care, is another question that I get working in the, you know, the journalism field. So there's a lot of times where, you know, I've really had to rise above, and, you know, when it comes to that leadership role in the newsroom specifically, it's just to keep fighting and being true to my truth. One lesson I've only recently learned over the past few years is for a long time, I just kept quiet, right? I always thought if people asked me those questions, maybe I was doing something wrong. Maybe they're right. Maybe a lot of people don't care, right? And they had me questioning myself and questioning who I was and what I was bringing to the table. And, you know, I always got accused too over the years of being too emotional about my people. I was too close to the subjects. A couple of years ago, and, you know, I have one of our friends on the line, Sarah, to thank for this, there was an opportunity to build a Downey Winjack legacy space at the Rogers headquarters. And, you know, that moment changed my life on so many levels, professionally, but most of all personally, because it showed me that day when I was looking at all those people and speaking to those people that I do no service being quiet. I do no service to anybody being quiet, and I don't do any service to us. And if I'm going to be a good leader, if I'm going to be a good leader for all of you and students and the future generation, then I have to lead by example. And I do that now, you know, almost sometimes to my detriment, but I can look myself in the mirror every night and be proud that I'm coming to work every day and speaking my truth and being the leader that I need to be for past, present, and future within the journalism, you know, part of my job. The other thing I just want to mention quickly is I also have my foot in the corporate world, right, on the corporate side of my company. And it has been the same type of struggle, but even a lot more off-putting sometimes, because sometimes you realize how far we still have to go to make moves when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to retaining people, when it comes to culture shifts. But you know what? I approach it the same way I do my journalism career, is that I have to speak up and I have to question things and I have to make people think about the decisions they make. And at the end of the day, my goal in life, both journalism and in the corporate world, is to make the world better for us. And that is the biggest thing that I've learned as I go through my leadership, and I always evolve. My leadership style always evolves, is that I can't be quiet and I have to keep questioning things so that I can make our corporate environment better for you all when you get to Rogers, whether you apply to City News, any place that you apply that I can touch will be changed for you based on the fact that I have found my voice and found the strength to keep fighting for us as a whole.
You know, I'm fortunate that in the bank I work for, there are a lot of Indigenous leaders there. Some of the most senior Indigenous people in the country work at the banks. And I don't have to go too far, I can find them pretty easily. And they're all willing to help mentor me or others. But what I find more interesting is looking for people that lead in their own way, because there are different leaders. You know, you don't have to be the A-type leader, look at me and put the world on your shoulders. I find solace in just looking at a room when I'm in there, and you know, everybody else is losing their head because, you know, there's this major project we have coming down, and you know, everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else, and you know, we're all under this large pressure. You know, I look over at this young Indigenous girl, and she's just, you know, nothing seems to be phasing her. You know, she's just watching everybody else, and you know, I walk over and I'm speaking to her, and I'm like, so, you know, what do you think of all this, right? Because I noticed she's not reacting like everybody else. And you know, she goes, James, I just got here. I don't have any history about what this project's about. And so she didn't even care what the subject was. All she cared about was how everybody else is acting, how everybody else is treating each other in this meeting. And she was really clear and concise about who she thought the leaders were, and they were none of the ones with all the stripes on their shoulders, because those are the ones that were doing most of the yelling and screaming. So for me, I'm lucky. I can find our leaders who are Indigenous at my bank. We hire them, and I would suggest that the other banks probably have leaders that they can gravitate to too. But again, there are different kind of leaders, and for me, I find that sometimes the quiet leaders are the best. When you can say something by just sitting there and you attract my attention in a room like that, that for me showed me that you can lead in different ways. So, I mean, you're going to hear a lot of stories here, but there isn't one way to do anything. There is different ways. So, just because you're doing it a different way doesn't mean it's wrong.
Like that. Just want to say thank you to Nicole and to you. Thanks for sharing those things. I guess, in terms of like being inside, like I've had various experiences. One, because I've probably worked for Indigenous organizations for a majority of my career. But being that voice in terms of a non-Indigenous, like be the PDAC, the provincial government, I'll use kind of where James was going, like a little bit about, different kinds. And that's working inside of the government was really difficult because of, and I'll say the quiet racism or the systemic issues that are in place there that, where they quietly be like, just know your place, your voice inside, but thank you for your opinion. And then it's just dismissed. And you work through it and it's tough. And I just kind of persevered through that because I had other people that joined, that office with me and, it was a creation of a new ministry. So we were all, a lot of Indigenous peoples in that space at that time were really pushing. This is the first time a government had its own standalone and they're trying for upwards, 30 to 40% of the workplace of that department or ministry being Indigenous. And one thing I learned was that sometimes I needed to have, and I'll say this, a third-party validation. I needed to have my boss, who was not an Indigenous person, but who was the boss. If I got them on side, they became my voice. And that was just a reality. If I wanted to move something, sometimes I actually needed to get somebody who wasn't Indigenous to talk very passionately and openly about Indigenous things, because that was the age that I was, we're talking over a decade ago. So, but that was the reality then, because a lot of times they could hear us, but they didn't listen to us. And I think there's a big difference to that. I think that things have changed. My current workspace and some of the others, where they're now listening and people are openly asking questions and there's respect and there's they want to know more to make sure that they're doing right. But you still have to be that voice and be accessible, but also be willing to push when you're being told to sit in the corner, so to speak.
I think this one, some of you have touched upon, so I might just change it a bit, but when thinking about advice, what advice do you think could help youth on their career journey? And we talked a lot about staying positive, but maybe talk a little bit about mentorship. I think would be a good one to talk about, and maybe sponsorship if it ever happened within your organization. And yeah, I think a lot of what you shared is already such great advice, but just maybe explore that topic a bit further would be great.
You know what? It's reaching out, and it's the one thing I learned going through school, coming up into the ranks when you're just out of school and you're making no money and you're trying to figure it all out, is to dig deep, find your voice, and ask for help or ask the questions and to reach out. It's important. People, as much as you think people aren't there, the people are there, and they are willing to provide advice or guidance or point you in a direction, or point you to another person who is going to be helpful, and to rely on the networks that you start to cultivate. one thing that was always pointed out to me is like you treat everybody with the same respect for the person who's mopping the floor all the way to the C-suite, to the executive, because as fast as you go up, you can come down just as fast. And you know what, some of the closest people that I've worked with in corporations or government or what have you are, guess where? We're not working in the premier's office or this or that. They're the OPP detachment, at the doors. I didn't have to like actually flash my badge to walk in through any security, because I'd sit there and shoot the shit with them, because they're very important people. Everybody has a role. So I think it's treating everybody with equal respect and getting to know people. It's keeping your mind open and reaching out to people. I think it's being willing to be uncomfortable. And I always go back to that. It's sometimes you need to jostle yourself or where you're going. Some are lucky enough to know where they want to go. They've found a path, they've got the school chosen, it's the proper program, and they're excelling. That, you know what, hats off to you, because if you've got that figured out, because not all the time does it work that is that easy, that people have found that passion. So if you're questioning where you are, then start to research it too, and find out who the people are that you need to talk to. And look into the communities. I don't care if it's on like Facebook, we have Indigenous groups there, and putting the questions out, or even joining associations like this and putting the question into us. After the panel, on LinkedIn, it's like, hey, you want come and be in my network, throw me a question. If I don't know how to help you, I probably do know somebody who can.
And I'll pick it up there from when you do get the job, because I think it's important to recognize that you all will get hired at some point in your life. And taking it from Scott, once you get hired, take advantage of the programs that the job comes with. And you might not know about them, so you got to really look for them. Find your company ERG or an employee resource group. Okay, that's going to be a huge source of support and guidance when it comes to you navigating, your new career, your new business, as the person you are, right? You want to find that support system, first of all, especially if you're Indigenous, find your Indigenous group so that you have a support system, that if you struggle with anything, or if you want to celebrate something, because we celebrate big time in our little group at Rogers, we celebrate our successes, right? There's a support system there for you as soon as you get into the company. Look for the mentorship programs. Okay, Rogers specifically has great mentorship programs. Whether you're a leader, they provide mentorship programs for elevating you as a leader. They've identified you as a leader. They also have programs that if you want to shadow other careers, the Walk a Mile program, you can do that and kind of experience what different roles that the company has, right? For Rogers, you can really choose your own adventure. I'm sure you all saw those books or heard of those books. You can choose the path that you want your career to go in. And that is just by looking up what's available to you and the programs that are there. Rogers has done very well in that respect. And it will help you along the way, right? Once you make those networking, do those networking type of, that too, attend networking events. We have networking events where we have ERG, programs every month, networking events, celebrating Black History, celebrating Indigenous Month, celebrating Pride Month. Go to those events, because the networking you can do there is absolutely incredible. It is what you make of it too, right? Like if you really want to succeed in the business that you choose to take a job in, there's just a lot of opportunities available to you outside that chosen career that you can really seek out to help you along the way and help you become successful within the chosen career that might not be present, you know, totally visually to you, you know, in the office job, that could really help you along the way. So just really, really seek those opportunities out, seek your mentors out, because, you know, there's a lot of people in there. And if you don't find a mentor that looks like you, which is something I've struggled with, I don't have any Indigenous managers or mentors at Rogers. Look for an ally, look for somebody that can, you know, that appreciates and can recognize your talent and who you are as a person. And again, really let them guide you along the way. And then last thing I'll say is be your own leader too, you know, in your new career, because that alone is going to see you very successful, is if you be your own leader and you carve your own path. And you can do that now with so many people's open minds and open hearts to new people joining our corporate world.
That was awesome, Nicole. And you know, she's right. And what you make of the company when you join is really what you'll get out of it. And it rings true at BMO as well. We have a lot of the same programs you heard about, and most companies do, but it depends on, you know, how well they'll run. So they're not all as good as all of them, but do check them out for sure. Give them the old college try. One of the programs that we have at BMO that we're really proud of is called the McKenna program. It's Cree for Pathway. So we have somebody who's responsible for the 350 Indigenous people we have at BMO to wrap her arms around every single one, ensure that they have their career conversations with their hiring manager, but we also track everything else about them, should they allow us to be part of that program. And then that's the link to all the other great programs, the ERG, internship, pay for education, all the great things that companies offer, but you really have to investigate them. So do your research, because it's not going to be obvious. So go do your homework.
Wonderful. Thank you.